The desert did not rush to her aid. It merely watched. At dusk, when the sun bled low against the mesas, she stumbled across the open sand, her shadow stretching long and broken behind her. Each breath scraped her lungs raw, each step a negotiation with collapse. When her knees finally gave way, the earth received her without ceremony. She lay there, skin cracked, spirit thinning, as the wind passed over her like an unanswered prayer. He saw her before he understood what she was. A dark shape against the pale spread of sand, unmoving where nothing should lie still. The rancher slowed his horse, the leather creaking beneath his weight. The land around him was quiet in the way that precedes consequence. He knew this silence well. It had followed him since the day he buried his wife beneath a crooked cross of mesquite. He did not dismount at once. Helping her would mean being noticed. And being noticed meant men would come, men who believed the desert itself owed them obedience. His hand tightened on the reins, knuckles whitening as memory pressed in. Yet something older than fear stirred within him. A stubborn remnant of the man he had been before loss taught him caution. He swung down from the saddle at last and knelt beside her, hearing her breath, thin, but present. "Easy," he said, though he did not know whether the word was meant for her, or for himself. He lifted her as one lifts a truth long avoided, carefully, and with full knowledge of the weight. Her body was light in his arms, too light, as though the desert had already begun claiming her share. The ride back was slow. Each step of the horse felt loud against the silence, each mile a narrowing of his remaining choices. She did not wake, but her breath warmed the hollow of his shoulder, a quiet insistence on staying. The ranch house emerged from the dust, crooked and weary, its boards bleached by years of unrelenting sun. He carried her inside, past the threshold he had not crossed with another soul in a long while. When the door closed, it did so with a sound that lingered. Not a welcome. A vow. She woke like a cornered animal, breath sharp, eyes searching the room for exits that did not exist. The rancher had already stepped back, giving her the only offering he could, space. He set a tin cup of water within reach, then a piece of hard bread beside it. His movements were slow, deliberate, as though haste itself might be taken for threat. When he tended her wounds, he did so without ceremony, cleaning the grit from torn skin with hands that had learned patience from grief. She watched him the entire time. Fear did not leave her, but it loosened, just enough to allow the work to continue. When he finished, he said nothing. Neither did she. Night settled over the ranch like a held breath. The wind pressed gently against the walls, carrying with it the distant language of the plains. From the far corner of the room, she began to hum. The sound was low and uneven, shaped by memory rather than tune, as though each note had traveled a long way to reach her mouth. He did not turn to look. Some things, he knew, were offered only if left unobserved. At dawn, she knelt by the door and traced a small symbol into the dirt with a stick, precise, practiced. She studied it for a moment, then swept it away with her palm, leaving the earth unmarked. The past, once spoken, could not be taken back. Morning revealed what night had concealed. Tracks cut across the hardpan near the fence, fresh, careless, made by someone who did not fear being followed. The rancher studied them in silence, the weight in his chest returning. He followed the marks only far enough to know they were not his own, then turned back, already aware of what this meant. The land, once quiet, had begun to speak. By midday, a lone rider appeared on the ridge to the east, black against the glare of the sky. He did not move. He did not need to. The peace they had borrowed was coming due. They sat opposite one another as the fire burned low, its light unsteady, its warmth earned. For a long while, only the sound of wood settling spoke between them. She was the first to break the silence. Her words came slowly, as if each one had to be lifted from somewhere deep and bruised. She spoke of a chief whose authority was enforced by fear, of a union demanded rather than chosen. Escape, she said, was paid for with nights of running and the certainty that pursuit would never tire. When she finished, she did not look at him. The rancher answered with his own truth. A wife taken by violence meant for another man. A home reduced to ash because mercy arrived too late. He spoke without bitterness, only a quiet astonishment that he had survived it at all. In the firelight, their losses faced one another. And neither turned away. Strength returned to her in small, deliberate measures. When she could stand without swaying, she did not ask what would become of her. Instead, she reached for his tools. At first, he watched from a distance as she worked the fence line, her movements careful but determined. She hauled water from the well, learned the rhythm of the land, the hours when the sun punished, and the brief moments when it relented. By evening, her hands bore the same dust as his. She was no longer something hidden within the walls. She had chosen to stay, not as a debt, but as an equal share of the burden. They arrived at noon, when the sun stood high and unforgiving. 3 riders came out of the glare, their silhouettes sharpening as they drew nearer, dust rising beneath their horses like a warning no one needed spoken. The rancher counted them quietly. Rifles across saddles. Purpose in their posture. These were not men searching, they were men who already knew. The land itself seemed to pull away from them, grass bending low, wind retreating. Inside the house, she felt it before she saw it. The air had changed, tightening, as if breath itself had learned fear. She stood at the window, watching certainty ride closer. Whatever peace they had built had been temporary. And now it was being tested. The rancher stepped onto the porch alone. The boards creaked beneath his boots, a sound too honest to disguise what was coming. He did not raise a weapon. His hands remained open at his sides, steady as the land behind him. When he spoke, his voice carried neither challenge nor plea, only the weight of a man who had already lost everything that could be taken from him. "You're standing on land that's been paid for," he said. "In blood, if not in coin." The men reined in, measuring him, measuring the house, the long miles behind them. Violence lingered in the space between breaths, coiled and restless. Yet something in his stillness, his refusal to flinch, forced hesitation where none had been expected. The desert listened. So did they. She stepped onto the porch beside him. Not as someone dragged into danger, but as one who had chosen it. For a moment, the world narrowed to that single act. The men saw it too, saw the way she stood straight, her presence neither defiant nor afraid. She did not speak. She did not need to. Her decision had already been made visible. The rancher did not turn to her, but something in his posture shifted, as though the weight he carried had finally been shared. Together, they formed a line the land itself seemed unwilling to break. What had begun as refuge had become allegiance. And in that choosing, neither of them stood alone. Months passed, marked not by dates but by seasons of labor. The land softened beneath their shared work, fences held, and the house learned new sounds, footsteps, breath, the low murmur of evening. Scars remained. They always would. Yet they no longer ruled the shape of the days. What pain had once demanded silence was now carried with care, honored without being obeyed. At dusk, the desert watched them move together across the yard, neither chasing nor fleeing. What began in fear endured in peace.